Hi, everybody. I'm BJ. I'm the genealogy specialist at the Maine State Library. And today I'm going to talk about tracing your English ancestors. So this is going to be a little later. There'll be a little that's relevant if your ancestors came over in the 17th century, the 1600s. This is going to look a little more at the slightly later, the 17 and 1800s. But it'll give you an idea of how things are done. And I will mention, and when I am at the records that will affect those of you who had ancestors who came over earlier, I'll point those out, okay? So let me start sharing my screen so that you can see what I'm talking about. And we'll start the slideshow. So you should all have my PowerPoint up now. Good. Okay, so we've dealt with that slide. So some general things. In general, you're going to have a place name that's a parish or a town and then a county. And the county boundaries changed in the 1970s, but for genealogy purposes, we're going to go with the historical county lines. And that's how things will tend to be organized. Early records may be in Latin. For the most part, we're not going to be dealing with quite that early, because by about 1600, almost everything's written in English. However, in the 1600s, you did still have what was called secretary hand for handwriting, and I've got a couple of examples of that that can be hard to read until you get used to it. Dates, especially in anything legal, maybe by what's called regnal years, which is basically, instead of saying 1840, they'd say the third year of Victoria, because she'd been on the throne as queen for 3 years. Mostly that'll be in legal stuff, but I just wanted to alert you that if you see something that says like 3 Vic, that's what that is. And money was pounds, shillings, and pence. And there were also guineas and a couple other things. If you get into that, you can always check that online or ask me about it. That's something just to be aware of. That's what the money was. So census records, the census was taken every 10 years, starting in 1841, years ending in 1. The most recent one that's available is 1911 for privacy reasons. The US has a 72-year privacy law. The UK has 100. And the UK census, well, let me take that back. Ireland and Wales are online at Ancestry. Next week, I'll talk about where the Scottish records are. But they are at Ancestry for England. And this is a standard sheet. This is 1901. And you get, let me turn on my pointer so that I can, address, and many times this will be a farm name. This happens to be in a city, so it's a street name, but you'll often get a farm name and then something like such and such farm, Shepherd's Cottage, main house, things like that. The relationship to the name, the relationship to the head of the household, condition as to marriage, married, single, widowed, divorced, their age, and what they did, instead of writing a separate column for male or female, they've got the ages for the men in one column and the ages for the women in the other. Occupation, whether they were the employer or an employee, and where they were born, which is usually, like in this case, it says Bradford, Yorkshire. Actually, it says York's Bradford, and it's the county and the town. And then they do list whether somebody had certain types of disabilities, deaf, blind, imbecile, and lunatic. Obviously, using terms we no longer use. And so the one thing to note on the census is from 1841, they did list everybody, but the 1841 census is skimpier, and they rounded adults' ages to a number ending in 0 or 5, so that you don't get that somebody was 37, it'll say 35. And if they were 42, it will say 40. So this is just a bit of a close-up so you can see what's there. 1911 is a little different. Instead of the ledgers, we get the actual form that somebody in the household filled out. And so you can see this is actually in this person, in this Francis Leroy's handwriting. So for 1911, we're getting, it's the equivalent of what you would have filled out this year if you did a paper one, with the details. So that's kind of nice to have. There are also, for years in between the census returns, there are what are called electoral registers. And basically what it's doing is listing everyone who was eligible to vote for that year. And it gives the name of the person, where they lived. This is a point, where they have, you need to be qualified, and so you have that, and the description of the property that was the reason they were eligible to vote. So you have that. So those fill in the years in between the censuses to some extent. And those are online at Ancestry and other places. So civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths started in England in 1837. What's online are indexes, so that you can find a record and order it from the National Archives. They're indexed by the quarter the birth was registered. So it's January, February, March is in one volume. Next volume for the year is April, May, June. And what sometimes happens is if you know somebody was born in April, oh, cat, that's not going to work. Come here. No, you cannot stand on the keyboard. Whoops. Sorry about that. We're having feline. There we go. There's where I was. Somebody's decided to make an appearance. So if somebody's born near the end of a quarter, it may be registered in the next quarter. So, if you know somebody an ancestor was born in April and it shows up in March, and it shows up in the April, May, June quarter, don't panic. They had 6 weeks to register. And so you would look that up and then you order the certificates. And if you're going to do that, it's pretty easy. You can order them online and get them by email. Birth records. Let's take a look at what they looked like. So looking at this, you can see how it lists this Beatrice Leroy is registered in the second quarter of 1900. So this is the closest it gets from the index. But then you can order the certificate. That takes you to a link where you can order it from Ancestry. And again, here you can see this is an index page for this man, and here's what the index looks like. This is for it's for the entire country. So here you have Wybert Leroyd. It tells you the district it was registered in, and then the volume and the page, which you'll need if you go to register or to request a document. But this can help you narrow down where somebody is. Now, this is Leroyd is a fairly geographically compact name, but if you've got a name that's more common, being able to have that district at least to get you to the right area of the country can be helpful. So yeah, it's frustrating that the full certificates aren't online, but that's the way they've chosen to do it. So it's the General Register Office, not the Archives. Sorry for misspeaking there. You would Google England General Register Office, and there's a easy process there for requesting a copy. And it really is simple. And you will get an extract. This is an older extract. The newer ones are typed. And as you can see, it has the time and place of birth, the names if they were given. It's a boy, father, mother, father's profession, and then who the informant was and their address. And then the information about when and where it was registered. So that's what the information you would get. So again, it's where it happened, both the district and then the exact place, children's names, father's name, an occupation, mother's name, informant's name, and if a child's name is changed, there's a revision issued. So marriage records, here, this is a modern copy of an older one, but nowadays you will often get one that has been typed, from what I understand. And so on the marriage record, you get the names of the date they were married. Here's where it was at St. Peter's Church in the district of Bradford in the county of York. You get the bride and groom's names, their ages. I will warn you that sometimes if it says 21, that's not actually how old they were. That's equivalent, essentially saying they're old enough to marry, they're 21 or older. And I have seen cases where that's what it's been used for, is it just says 21, meaning, you know, they may be 26, they may be 29, but they're old enough to marry without parental permission, which was 21. Whether they were unmarried or a widower or divorced, their occupations, where they were living at the time they were married, the father's name, and the father's occupation. Notice that there's no mother's name here. It's within the last 10 years that they actually redid the certificates to include the mother's name. It took that long for them to redo these. So as you can see, this is an 1866 record, and this was extracted in 2008. So that's the sort of thing you would get. Here are a couple other samples. This one at the bottom is when Prince William married Catherine Middleton. And you'll notice, you know, in 2005, it's still Oh no, actually, this is when Prince Charles married Camilla, sorry. And you'll notice still doesn't, in 2005, doesn't have the mother's name yet. So this is the sort of things you'll be getting. So again, where the marriage happened, information about the couple involved, the father's information. Death records, again, look very similar. You're getting this information, where the death happened, the name of the person, generally have the maiden name somewhere on the certificate for the women, occupation, and their usual address if it was different from their place of death. The informant's name, the cause of death, and the date it was registered. So before 1837, we need to look at parish register records. And this is where this goes back into, the system goes back to about 1600. So even those, a little earlier than that in some places if the records were kept well. So even those of you who had fairly early immigrant ancestors may be looking at church records. And the big division here is it a Church of England, Anglican Church, which was the official church, or is it nonconformist? Quakers and Jews were exempt from some of the regulations, but other nonconformists still had to register their marriages with the Church of England parish. So Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians, Independents, you will often still find their records. They may have kept separate records, but they will also be in the parish records. So what you're getting at the church records will be baptisms rather than births. Generally, it'll be banns for the marriage rather than the actual marriage record, and it'll be burials instead of deaths. And there's also a category I'm going to talk about briefly at the end called the parish chest records that are a very interesting set of records that are not used enough, partly because they're only recently become available online to some extent. So here's a baptism from 1581, and this is written in that secretary hand I told you about. So it's a little hard to read for those of us who are used to modern handwriting. But there are guides online on what the letters look like. And to some extent, if you know what you're looking for on the page, I was able to find the Leroy, which is my mother's maiden name that I was looking for here, and can figure out, here's Isabel, daughter of William Leroy, and the rest of it I'm able to tell from this. And a lot of this, if you're looking at Ancestry at these records, or at Find My Past, or at the local council archive, you'll have gotten enough from the index that you use to find the original record that you can actually look and see what else is there and figure out whether it's worth struggling through or just realizing that it really doesn't say much more than Isabel, daughter of William Leroy, was baptized. Okay. Here's one from 1830, where you have the name of the baby, the parents' names, the father's occupation, where they lived, father's occupation, and the date of the baptism, or the date of the birth. The baptism took place in 1830, the birth was in 1829. So you can see here, they corrected something. They wrote something wrong and then corrected it. So these are generally easier to read, and they have the advantage by the middle of the to late 1700s, you are getting the father's occupation that is helpful. This is a marriage record. And again, you have William, I think this was Rallison and Sarah Leroy, and that's all the information that's there. But on the other hand, this is from 1655, so that's, at that point, it's better than nothing. And as you can see, you're getting the transition here. This is late secretary hand, and then it changes, and I'm guessing this is a younger priest who was trained with the more modern style of handwriting, which is one reason I pulled this one to show you, is, you know, there's a distinct break not only in the handwriting, but in the style of writing that they're doing. Can you guys see that difference? Just looking at this, even if you didn't know this history of handwriting, you can see that there's a change. And often this is, you've got the older priest minister who's had the training in the old style handwriting that was common until the early 1600s. And then here in 1655, this is probably a younger priest coming in who's been trained in the more modern style. Starting in the late 1700s, early 1800s, you do get these pre-printed forms, which have the advantage that they're consistent and making sure you have all the basic information. It does mean you don't get interesting little asides from priests. They're only filling in what's needed. But they were very handy because, again, it makes it easier to figure out what bits of information are there because it's consistent pretty much across parishes and within a parish register. You get death and burial records, and in most cases, you just get the name and where they lived. In some cases, you get a parent's name if it was a child. But you'll notice here, these are baptisms in this column. These are marriages. And this says sepult, and that's Latin for burials. There are a couple English words that derive from that. But you want to be careful in making sure you get the right column because a lot of these early registers were done in this kind of column style. And the other thing is to keep track of dates, because depending on how the priest did it, you may get multiple years on a page with the year starting in different places. If there were a lot more births than deaths in a parish, you want to make sure that things line up on the dates, because they didn't always leave spaces. Paper was expensive, and so they used it as carefully as they could. And then later you do tend to get just the death and burial records by month. So this is a very nicely written one from 1769. And then again, into the 1800s, you get pre-filled out or filled out pre-printed forms. Now, the parish chest records are fascinating. These are pictures of, and they really were a parish chest. And legally, each church was supposed to have a parish chest that contained the register that had the births, deaths, and marriages, and also the other records for that parish. And so what records are we talking about? There was a system of settlement and removal, basically meaning, did you belong to this parish if you needed financial assistance because you were poor. And so you will get records saying this person has been in this parish for 18 months, but belongs to such and such parish, so we're not paying any poor relief to this person. You get overseer's accounts of parish discipline, of collecting fees, all sorts of things like this. You also get, because the church was, up until the 1830s, was in charge of poor law distributions, you get bastardy records, because they will have examined the mother to see who she's accusing of being the father of an illegitimate child, so that the parish can go after the father for child support. So the parish doesn't have to pay for the child. So in a lot of cases, you'll get the examination of the mother, a summons to the father, and somebody, either the father or another relative, putting up a bond saying, we will support this child, so that the parish doesn't have to. Does that make sense? That they didn't want to pay for children they didn't have to? And you also get poor law records. Who's paying taxes to support the poor and who's getting the relief. And this will also include some apprenticeships, because you have, when you had particularly boys, but some girls, getting to be 8, 9, 10 years old, they would be apprenticed to somebody to learn a trade. And the person they were apprenticed to was responsible for feeding and clothing them, so the parish didn't have to. And the child learned a trade so that they would not be needing poor relief when they were adults. So these records are gradually, for different parishes, being digitized. They're not all in one place. So for all of these parish registers, a lot of the registers are at Ancestry, but not all. This is a case where the Wiki, the Family Search Wiki for the county you're interested in, will help you figure out where things are. You know, I've talked about the Family Search Wiki a lot, and this is a case where it becomes really helpful, because particularly these parish chast records, I'm finding either coming online, a few are at Ancestry, a few are at Find My Past, some are at county archives, some are still in the hands of the local church, who works with a local historical society to put them online. Some are at academic libraries. They've been donated, or that, you know, there are cases where they're just donated to the local university library. Other cases where the university library holds them and does the preservation, but no longer owns them. But the academic library has the correct storage for these older records. So that's something to keep in mind, that not all of these are online yet, but they are getting to be, and they're scattered all over. And so you can see here's one from the early 1800s, looking at, this is a settlement, and it's saying, complaint being made unto us, 2 of Her Majesty's Justices of the Peace for the said riding, says that, I think it's David something, his wife and family is lately come into the said town, endeavoring to settle there, and that they are likely to become chargeable, and that his last settlement was the town of Bolton, and the said Edward, I forget, I think it's Shorehome, having no lawful settlement in the said town of Brisbane. You know, so basically they're saying, we're not responsible for paying for this guy. If he wants help for his family, he needs to go back to Bolton and not ask us. So this can be really helpful if you found traces of this family in the town that's saying they're not one of us. But let's say you found a baptism there. This is a handy way to look and see, well, oh, before that he was in Bolton. And to look there. Here's another one, same thing, saying that she delivered a bastard child within the township of Bolton, aforesaid, which said child is now living and become chargeable to the township, and that charges William Day, late of Ardley, in the said writing, with having had several times carnal knowledge of her body and did beget her with child of the said bastard child, which she was delivered as. So, you know, these are pretty blunt, but if you have somebody who's born when the parents weren't married, it's a way to figure out who the father was, because, you know, that's helpful to have for a family tree. This is another one. This is an indenture, and you'll notice there were 2 copies of this, and you see how this top is cut? They would have cut each one of these differently so that you could match them up to make sure they were authentic. Nonconformist Church records included Quakers and Jews. I'm going to talk about Quakers later, so I'm going to just go quickly through this set, because I'm going to do a whole hour on Quaker records. Probate records, again, like with civil registration, before up to 1838, it was ecclesiastical courts, church courts, that handled probate rather than anything secular. Many fewer people owned their land in England than in North America, so you have many fewer probate records. But there are very nice indexes like this for the whole country, where they go through and they tell you the name of the person who died, their address, when they died, which court. So Wakefield here is telling you that that's the Wakefield court that dealt with this, who the administrator was, the administrator's occupation, and how much the estate was worth. So these are online, and you can find these. And occasionally you get, like, I have one for a couple greats aunt, and I'm not quite sure why she had one. She didn't have much of an estate, but for some reason she had a will that was proved. So the Poro Records, again, before 1834, it was parish officials. After 1834, it was secular poor law unions, and they had poorhouses, which are horrendous places to live. You didn't go to the poorhouse unless your basic choices were to go to the poorhouse or starve to death. Particularly up early on, before when it was still parish officials, they often did what was called assisted emigration to the colonies. In other words, they paid for somebody to leave England and go settle in the Americas, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, as a way of getting rid of people who were poor. But again, there can be lots of detail in these. They're harder to find for the earlier ones. They're in with the Parish Registers. And or the later ones haven't the secular ones haven't necessarily been digitized yet, but they often do exist. So that's just worth knowing that there was a whole system, a fairly extensive system for dealing with people who needed help, especially widows and orphans. So other records you might find. Military. Huge British military. They kept records. They're at the National Archives. They're really helpful if somebody served in the military. They often have, especially in the 1800s, early 1900s, an exact birth date that you might not find elsewhere if they were born before the start of civil registration in 1837. Court and criminal records are starting to come online, as are some of the trade records of apprenticeships, and when people move from apprentice to journeyman to master craftsman, some of those records are coming online. You find much less, because of not owning land, you find much less of the land records deeds that we use in North America, but the big estates owned by the really wealthy, which is where most of our ancestors would have rented their farm from, those estate records are starting to be put into archives because that's how they can be preserved well. There are also 19th century school records that are being digitized and put online, which again can be helpful. They often have details about a child in terms of birth date, place, parents' names that, again, especially if you're looking at children just before that 1837 with the civil registration and 1841 with the start of the census. If you're seeing school records from right around then, that may have information that isn't in another record. So that's the really quick overview. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Come on, stop, and check. There. And the one thing I'm going to show you online, let me get out of this. Come on, there we go. And share the screen again. This is nationalarchives.gov.uk. They have online resources on the front page that are often quite fun to explore. So if you're bored, it's worth going and looking at those. What I want to show you is search the catalog. And what this is doing, they have patched together both the National Archives catalog and more than 2,500 other archives around the UK. So if we enter, we're going to go with my nice favorite name to search on this. It's my mother's maiden name. Oh, and before I go any further, they do have research guides here that will help you figure out. And that's actually Hobbs meowing, if you can hear him, not Scout. They have information about what they've got. If you want to look at just a particular collection, they have some of those. You can find an archive. You can search by area if you go into the options. So let's do Leroy. And what you will see is National Archives for that subsection, the War Office section. And then if we keep going down, This is at the British Library. Here's one that's at the Wiltshire and Swindon History Center, the West Yorkshire Archive Service. And so you're able from the National Archives website to search around the country. And so it's worth putting the names you're looking in there. And obviously, if you're looking for a name like Smith or Johnson, it's going to be harder. But when you have the less usual names, or you can narrow down to a place, because they do try to be pretty good. Or if you're looking for military, that's probably going to be at the National Archives. So there is a tour of this page that is here. You can narrow down only at the National Archives, held by other archives. And so this is only the ones that aren't at the National Archives, which can be a way to help narrow down. And you can even just choose, they give you the choice here. So if I only want to see what's at the West Yorkshire Archives, which is in multiple locations, I can click those and hit refine. And it only brings up those records that are still at the Yorkshire Archives. And if you want, you can then say, I want to see only the 8 that were generated in the 19th century. So there is a fair bit you can play around with. If you've got one of the more common names, you can look at just a couple particular archives, things like that. Does that make sense? That they've got a pretty powerful search engine. And right now, as long as their in-person is closed, if something's been digitized, you can download it for free. They usually charge a slight fee. Not everything's been digitized, but at least if it's been digitized, you're able to get a copy of it now. So I've been going through and finding some things that are sort of at the edge of what I'm interested in, but so I'm not willing to pay for it, but I'm able to go in and get a copy because it's been digitized and I can, but that's only for the things that are at the National Archives. It's not for these other regional archives. But again, it's something that has been occupying what few free minutes I have to go in and find things where it's, as I said, it's a little off my direct research interest. So I don't really want to pay for the record, but if I can get it for free, I'll take it. So that's just, I know this is a brief overview. The big thing to remember is that there are a lot of records. They're scattered around the UK, which is one reason I wanted to show you this, because it gives you a way to start looking for things and figure out, what are the archives near where my ancestor lived. And as with everything, for particular locations, look at the different county pages at, let me go there and show you one. Family Search Wiki. And we'll go to Europe and to England. And then we'll click on Yorkshire. And so what you'll want to do, there's general information about Yorkshire, link to maps, link to the various local research resources, like, which libraries and archives are in Yorkshire. And then, for example, if we want to look for the church records, this is just for Yorkshire church records. And it tells you that a lot of the parish registers for that area are at Family Search. The Durham Diocese is at Find My Past. and various other sources. So, and there's, for example, there's a list of parishes in the county, which is a whole lot of them, and various other, the voting records would get you the electoral registers, and so on. So I'd highly encourage you, if you're looking in England, to read the wiki pages for the county you're working in. Okay, so I'll stop sharing the screen so I can see you guys. So any questions at this point? I know this is a lot of information. It's really only meant to be an overview. But it is nice that the National Archives is trying to be sort of a coordinating force in finding the records. And between the National Archives and the Family Search Wiki, you should be able to figure out where something is. Okay. All right. Do we have a question? No.
Is this just all England proper?
Yes.
You're talking about, when does Scotland and Ireland come in?
Okay, I will be talking about Scotland next week and Ireland the week after. They did things differently.
Right.
And so it would be too much to try to do them all in one presentation.
Right. Thank you.
Because they did them enough differently that, and the records are in different places. So it's just, that's why I broke it down the way I did. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.